Did you know that a Pokémon similar to Mechagodzilla was replaced by Mew? Or that there were about to be more than 65,000 different versions of the first games?
Say my name. Eisenberg. You're goddamn right.
The first generation of Pokémon games are classics, and they set the foundation for what is now the highest grossing media franchise of all time. Let's dive deep into Pokémon Red, Blue and Yellow, as well as their remakes on Game Boy Advance and Nintendo Switch. By the way, it would be awesome if you subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much. Missing No. The first generation of Pokémon games is as glitchy as it gets, and the most popular of them all is Missing No. It stands for Missing Number, and it's a bird normal glitch Pokémon that can have different appearances such as Ghost from Lavender Town, a Kabutops skeleton, or its classic backward L shape. Encountering this mess of pixels has a lot of benefits for the player, such as multiplying items like rare candies and nuggets. If you check the Hall of Fame, it will become completely unrecognizable with Pokémon you never used. Glitched Pokémon and even distorted music nowhere to be found in the game under normal circumstances. From what I understand, Missing No is linked to every empty space that was left in the memory of the original 190 Pokémon that were intended to be present in the game. More on that later. Mew. Mew is a mythical Pokémon both in the games and in real life, especially in the 90s. Even its Pokédex entry has some truth to the real world, as it says that it's so rare that it's still said to be a mirage by many experts. Some of you may already know that Mew was a late addition to the games before completion, a little secret that not even Nintendo was aware of, and something that most probably wouldn't have agreed to include due to the high risk of adding it after the debugging process had already been completed. Mew was an urban legend, a myth, and many thought that completing the Pokédex with 150 Pokémon would give the player Mew, but instead, everyone who put the effort and sometimes the money into getting both versions received just a diploma, and yes, I was one of them. Mew under the truck. This is one of the most popular urban legends in video game history. The 90s were some sort of a mythical era where the internet wasn't available to everyone, and even if it were, it didn't have the massive amount of information it has today, and therefore it was hard to know what the limits of a game were. Next to the SSN, there's a section of the map that the player cannot access under normal circumstances unless they have access to surf. If you go east, you will find a truck that doesn't appear anywhere else in the entire game. This led people to think that it was something special and that you might get Mew, the only Pokémon in the game that is unobtainable without cheating devices or events. The rumor became so popular that Game Freak added the same truck in Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green. In Pokémon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, you could get a revive at the same location. Lavender Town Syndrome. Lavender Town's theme is very creepy on its own. The solitude of this small town, whose main topic is the fact that creatures like Pokémon can actually die, is eerie, if we take into account that Pokémon is generally light-hearted. Lavender Town Syndrome refers to a creepypasta in which the players who heard the town's music would experience headaches and nausea or even attempt against their own lives due to a certain frequency that could only be perceived by small children. Given that Pokémon was infamous due to the Porygon incident, some people thought that there was some truth behind this. However, nowhere in the news can you find any reference to this type of incident. Pokémon Red and Green. We have Pokémon Red and Blue on this side of the world, but the first Pokémon games ever were Red and Green, released in Japan in 1996. These games had some differences from what we got in the West. The most evident ones are Pokémon sprites, which overall are better designed in the American releases. Look at Venusaur, Gengar and Mew for example. However, there are a couple of sprites that look better in Pokémon Green, such as Blastoise, Aerodactyl and Mewtwo, way better than what we got. Cerulean Cave or the Unknown Dungeon's layout was different, and the man who won't let the player pass because he needs his coffee was drunk in the Japanese Pokémon Red and Green versions. A funny glitch happens if you fight Sabrina and lose, as once you re-enter the gym, you will be granted victory automatically. Bill's Secret Garden. The land of legendary and mythical Pokémon, as well as Pokégods. Bill's Secret Garden refers to the area behind Bill's house that supposedly contained a place where you could find Pokémon that were unobtainable anywhere else in the game. This of course was false, as nothing else exists beyond that spot. Mew gave birth. We named the newborn Mewtwo. The Pokémon Mansion has several interesting journal entries with lore about Mew, Mewtwo, and how it came into existence. If you played these games as a small child, you might have thought that Mew literally gave birth to Mewtwo, but this is only a metaphor, as it was more like Mew's DNA made possible the creation of Mewtwo. Broken mechanics. The list is extensive, but here are some broken mechanics in the games. Due to a programming error, ghost moves that were supposed to be super effective against psychic Pokémon will always miss. X accuracy makes the Pokémon's moves ignore accuracy checks, including one-hit KO moves. Focus Energy, a move that was intended to increase the critical hit ratio, did exactly the opposite. Hyper Beam didn't need to charge if the attack fainted a Pokémon. Critical hits were more likely to land if the user had a higher speed stat. The special stat accounted for what is currently known as special attack and special defense, determining how much damage a Pokémon both receives and deals when special moves are used. You had a 0% chance of thawing out if you were inflicted with the frozen status. Similar Pokémon CRIES. Due to memory limitations, certain measures are required to fit everything in a game. An example is how several Pokémon share the same CRIES, or a slight variation of them. Here are some examples. Glitch City. By performing a series of steps in the Safari Zone and tricking the game into thinking you're still there while you're on the outside, if you run out of steps, you will be sent back to the entrance of the Safari Zone, but when you exit, you will travel to a messy dimension with weird things on the floor such as numbers, cave entrances, and water spots. If you save the game there with no access to fly or teleport, your save file will be ruined. Professor Oak wants to battle. Unused trainer data for Professor Oak exists in all Generation 1 games. After performing one of several glitches, Professor Oak will challenge you to a battle. His team consists of a level 66 Tauros, a level 67 Executor, a level 68 Arcanine, a level 69 Venusaur, Charizard or Blastoise that wasn't chosen by the player or rival, and a level 70 Gyarados. Considering this, Professor Oak would have been the strongest NPC in the entire game. Invisible PC. If you go to the hotel in Celadon City and walk to the top right corner and press A, you will have access to a PC. This is due to the hotel being a copy of a Pokémon Center with the sprite for the PC removed, but the code for it still present. Blue's RATICATE. This was a very popular theory. Blue's team consists of the same evolutionary line Pokémon up to the SSN battle. This however changes when we face him at Lavender Town's Pokémon Tower, in which his RATICATE we had previously defeated at the SSN is no longer a part of his team. The fact that our next encounter with Blue takes place at the Pokémon Tower led many to speculate that he had buried his Pokémon, due to him not being able to make it to the Pokémon Center to heal it after its defeat at the SSN. Again, just another theory. White Hand. As if we didn't have enough of Lavender Town's music, there's a little girl who asks us if we believe in ghosts. If we answer no, she will say that the white hand on our shoulder is not real. In the Pokémon Origins anime, we can see a reference to this, in which a white hand can actually be seen over Red's shoulder. This white hand was also part of a creepypasta we'll see deeper. Mew Glitch. The first mythical Pokémon ever was one of the hardest ones to get back in the 90s, and only a few were able to get their hands on it, thanks to events mainly outside of America. However, a very popular and helpful glitch surfaced on the internet, in which by following a series of steps, you're able to encounter Mew at level 7. The specificity and complexity of the steps for this glitch have always made me wonder how on earth can a human being come up with these things. I guess somebody found this by digging into the game's code, but who knows for sure. Peekaboo. Back in 1999, and after the release of the first movie, a set of trading cards related to the movie came out. 8 of these cards contain the name Peekaboo. Here's one example. Squirtle and Bulbasaur are not too happy about the fact that Buru, Peekaboo, Raichu and Cubone woke up Togepi, and they plan on letting those loud-mouthed hooligans know it. Peekaboo in fact refers to the Pokémon we now know as Marill. This is very odd to say the least, because Marill's Japanese name is Mariru, and even Snubble's Japanese name Buru is used correctly in the cards. It is possible that Topps, the company that manufactured the cards, came up with that name given the similarity of Pikachu and Marill, giving birth to the urban legend of Peekaboo in the original games. This Pokémon was part of the pantheon of Pokégods in Generation 1. More on that later. The Pokémon War. I tell you kid, electric Pokémon saved me during the war. These are the words spoken by Lieutenant Surge at the Vermilion City Gym. Now, think for a second that your dad is not around, and most of the people you encounter throughout the game are very young or very old. All of this made people theorize that Generation 1 took place right after the war that Surge mentions, and that the lack of many adults is a consequence of them enlisting in the army to fight against the enemy. As interesting as it sounds, there is nothing else referencing any war in the Generation 1 games. Yoshi and Luigi. April Fools has been the birth of so many urban legends in video games like Shenlong in Street Fighter. The official Nintendo website posted an article in April 1999 explaining how to get the Pokémon Lickitung to evolve into Luigi. I have to ask, why Lickitung precisely? On the other hand, an Expert Gamer magazine of 1999 displayed an article allegedly detailing a method to get Dragonite to evolve into Yoshi. Obviously, all this was a hoax. Japanese Lavender Town's theme. Back in the 90s, it was hard to get your hands on the Japanese games, and this was ideal for making up stories about those games. One of these legends came in the shape of how the music from Lavender Town in Pokémon Red and Green was different, more high-pitched. Take a listen. I don't know who made this, but it does give a vibe of hopelessness and sadness, matching that of the noble Purple Town. However, the real Japanese Lavender Town's theme is exactly the same as that of the American versions. Ditto is Mew's failed clone. This is a very interesting topic that deserves its own video. Due to several similarities between Mew and Ditto, it is said that this blob is Mew's failed clone. Here are some of the elements that connect the two. Both Pokémon are similar in color both in their regular and shiny forms. Ditto, and at some point Mew's DNA, were present at the same place where Mewtwo was created. In fact, the Cinnabar Mansion is one of the few spots where Ditto can be found. Both Pokémon are gender unknown. They weigh 8.8 pounds. To this day, there are a total of 1019 species. Can you guess which two Pokémon can learn the move Transform? Mew and Ditto. Both have stats that are even across the board. Although there are a lot of coincidences, did you know Gaming has a very good video saying why this theory might not be true? Buried Alive. Buried Alive refers to a creepypasta that states that, originally, the final battle at the Pokémon Tower was intended to be against a corpse, whose team consisted of a Mach, a Gengar, and 2 white hands. The 2 white hands are a reference to the little girl seeing a white hand on the protagonist's shoulder. Supposedly, there was no victory script for this battle, and once you lose it, you would see the following screen. Altering Cave. The Altering Cave is located on Outcast Island in Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green, where only Zubat can be found. Its original purpose was that of being able to encounter Johto species that were unobtainable anywhere else in the game through Nintendo events. However, this mechanic was never used anywhere in the world, and in the end, Emerald Safari Zone ended up having all Altering Cave's Pokémon available in the wild. Pokégods. The term was in popular use among fans in the late 90s and into the new millennium as the gold and silver versions were in development. The concept was very much discussed and disputed on various forum websites at the time, and many edited screenshots were passed off as real to try to prove the case. Rumors of the so-called Pokégods are thought to have originated with Mew, the mysterious Pokémon about whom very little was known at the time. The lack of information led to speculation and rumors on how to obtain Mew, including the infamous truck rumor. Here are some real Pokémon considered as Pokégods. Mew, Pikablu, Togepi, Denryu, Ho-Oh, Kirei-Hana, King Slowpoke, Lunarion, Solarion, Bruno or Buru, Donphan. Some based on existing Pokémon. Nidogod, Pikaflare, based on Honoguma, the original fire starter from the early version of Pokémon Gold and Silver, Daimonix or Crystallonix, and here are some weird ones. Millennium, Anthrax, Mysterio, Apocalypse, Ruin. The list goes on forever. Twitch Plays Pokémon. This channel went live with a playthrough of Pokémon Red on February 12, 2014, and received widespread media attention internationally for its chaotic nature and unique concept. The channel is notorious for its fan-generated lore, spawning thousands of stories, images, videos, and internet memes. It had around 120,000 simultaneous viewers at its peak, with almost 36 million total views in the first run alone. It has received several awards, including a Guinness World Record. The Helix fossil, somehow at the top of the item list, was inferred as some kind of consultation in hardship, as since it was in the first item slot, it was constantly being selected. This was compounded when the fossil was revived at the Pokémon Lab. Fans saw this as a resurrection, transforming the character into a kind of god. Munna. Although Munna is a Gen 5 Pokémon, its features are mentioned by an NPC next to an entrance to Rock Tunnel that says, "The Pokémon here are so chunky. There should be a pink one with a floral pattern." Well, apparently Game Freak listened to her and came up with Munna, a Gen 5 Pokémon that perfectly fits that description. Moltres in Victory Road. Even as a small child, I knew that legendary Pokémon were supposed to be unique and hard to find creatures that could only be seen by a few ones. However, the fact that Moltres was in plain sight made me wonder why it was like that. The other two legendary birds were present in more isolated and special spots. So why would Moltres be in Victory Road where a bunch of strong trainers were? I think Game Freak was aware of this and placed Moltres on top of Mount Ember. Mr. Fuji. Mr. Fuji might seem like any other NPC, but his backstory is incredible and connected to many events prior to Generation 1. Not only was he friends with Blaine, as evidenced by a picture in the Cinnabar lab in Pokémon Fire Red, but he was actually known as Dr. Fuji, the founder of this research facility. Not only that, but in Pokémon Emerald, by using the old map to travel to Faraway Island, we can find a sign with old, fading writing whose author is believed to be Mr. Fuji. The fact that Dr. Fuji made a trip to this faraway place where most probably he encountered Mew or its DNA, and also that in Pokémon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, Blaine states that the Pokémon Mansion still holds remnants of his old friend's research, it's very likely that not only was he the author of the Pokémon journals found in the mansion, but also the main responsible for Mewtwo's creation. Legendary Pokémon Overworld Sprites. Although there are 4 legendary Pokémon Overworld Sprites for the legendary birds and Mewtwo, there are unused Overworld Sprites for Mew, Raikou, Entei, Suicune, Celebi, and Deoxys attack and defense forms. Their use is not known, but it's possible that they might have been planned for events. Real-world references. It is evident that the Pokémon world takes place in a different universe to ours. However, there are plenty of elements that reference the real world. Here's a list of some of them. Mew, a mythical Pokémon of South America which had been thought extinct. A growing number of people have seen it recently. Guyana, South America. A new Pokémon was discovered deep in the jungle. Lieutenant Surge, the Lightning American. He is rumored to have been a pilot while home in America. Scientist Taylor in the Sylph Company building states that the Tixie branch of the company is in Russian no man's land. In the Japanese version, he states that the Ponaya Tunguska branch is located deep in Russia. Poliwrath. This strong and skilled swimmer is even capable of crossing the Pacific Ocean just by kicking. Arcanine. A legendary Pokémon in China. Many people are charmed by its grace and beauty while running. Pokémon Stadium alternative colors. Shiny Pokémon didn't exist during Generation 1, but something very close could be found if you transferred your Pokémon into Pokémon Stadium. Somehow, your OT's ID number and the nickname your Pokémon has will determine whether your Pokémon has a regular palette or a different coloration. Some changes are subtle, but others like Bulbasaur can be dramatically different. This is the first instance in all of the Pokémon games where you can see Pokémon with different colors, similar to shiny Pokémon. Unused tracks. In Pokémon Red, Blue and Yellow, there were a couple of unused or incomplete tracks. Here are some examples. Shiny hunting in Generation 1. While shiny Pokémon were introduced in Generation 2, there's a way to catch shiny Pokémon in Red, Blue and Yellow. If a Pokémon in Generation 1 had very specific numbers in their stats, when transferred to Generation 2 games they would be shiny Pokémon. Back then, it was the only way in which Pokémon like Mewtwo that weren't available in Pokémon Gold, Silver and Crystal could be obtained in their shiny form. Lostel. Lostel is an NPC character that appears in Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green on the Sevi Islands. The player must rescue her from a wild Hypno and bring her back to her father in order to progress with the plot. Lostel's encounter with a wild Hypno in the games may be a reference to Hypno's original Pokédex entry in Pokémon Red and Green, where it is said to have kidnapped a child once. Hypno and children have been linked in various ways. For example, the popular Sleeper 97 t-shirt shows the silhouette of Hypno taking two children somewhere. Neon City. I included this one and I'm not sure how popular it was outside my country, but I clearly remember somebody mentioning a method to get to Neon City, a city bigger than Celadon City and that I think was inspired by the anime as it was featured in the episode The Song of Jigglypuff. According to it, you had to beat the Elite Four without saving 50 times in a row. Then, instead of starting the game in Pallet Town, you would automatically appear in front of the SSN, which would have returned. It would take you to Neon City, a very advanced place with tons of rare items and exotic Pokémon. Surprised Pokémon. In Fuchsia City, there's a Pokémon zoo with a couple of species. You're not supposed to interact directly with these creatures without the use of glitches or cheating devices. If you manage to get next to these Pokémon and interact with them, a text box will pop up with an exclamation mark. This is as if the Pokémon were in shock to see that you got there, although this is more likely to be a placeholder. 4 fingers. Mr. Mime's original design had 4 fingers. Much like many other cartoon characters out there. This was his design in the original games, promo artwork and more. This ended up getting changed, as there was a bit of backlash to the design in Japan. A number of Japanese parents ended up complaining about Mr. Mime not having a fifth finger, as they saw this as being associated with the Yakuza. Some Yakuza gang members are expected to cut off their pinky fingers to show remorse for an offense that they have previously committed. After cutting a portion of the pinky off, the gang member wraps it and presents it to his boss. The evil Magikarp wants to fight. In the 90s, most video games out there were either in English or Japanese. Games that were available in Spanish, at least in America, were very rare and quality standards for localizations weren't as high as today. This is evident if we take a look at the Spanish Pokémon Red, Blue and Yellow, since if a Pokémon bites when you are fishing, the battle screen will indicate, for example, El malvado Magikarp atacó, which translates to the evil Magikarp attacked. I personally can't imagine how anyone at all could have used malvado when this word has nothing to do with the original language. English prototype Pokémon names. Not to be confused with the original Japanese names, Gen 1 Pokémon were assigned prototype names before Game Freak established the ones we are familiar with. Here are some of the most remarkable. Sandstorm, Aria, Ariola, Blaze, Aqua, Hocus, Pocus, NY, LA, Morpho, At, and Atlantis, in reference to the lost city of Atlantis. Early Japanese blue sprites. Although we are familiar with both the sprites of Pokémon Red and Green and the ones from the American versions, not too many people know about the early Japanese Pokémon Blue sprites that you can see here. Japanese Pokémon Blue would actually be the basis for the American versions, as Blue in Japan was an update of the original Red and Green games. Capsule Monsters. Capsule Monsters was Satoshi Tajiri's early design concept of Pokémon. This early concept traces all the way back to Tajiri's childhood years, during which he enjoyed bug collecting. Various Pokémon are known or believed to have originated from this early concept work, including Lapras, Ghastly, and Slowbro, though many of the concept sketches included generic-looking creatures. No escape. This was explained by the YouTuber Picaspri. Gen 1 games were pretty flawed, and there were several things the player could do, intentionally or unintentionally, in order to get trapped in a way that it would be impossible to escape, forcing the player to start a new save file from scratch. If you happen to enter the Elite Four with a weak poison or fighting Pokémon that only knows Rage, and also has exhausted all of the other moves' power points, do not dare to save the game in front of Lorelei, or you'll have to say goodbye to your save file. The reason for this is due to the nature of the move Rage. Once you use it, it will start repeating over and over again. This wouldn't be a problem anywhere else, but Lorelei's first Pokémon, Dugong, knows a psychic move that no matter what, it will keep using. Any damage inflicting psychic move would make the Pokémon faint, ending the battle and exiting the Elite Four. But there's a small problem. Dugong's psychic move happens to be Rest, a recovery move that will never damage the opposing Pokémon. In later generations, power points for opposing Pokémon are limited, and once they're over, the Pokémon will start using Struggle, resulting in one of the two Pokémon eventually fainting. The problem with Generation 1 is that Pokémon of other trainers will never run out of power points. The only way the player would be able to escape is if Rage missed the opponent 20 times in a row, so it would start struggling and eventually faint. However, the chance of Rage missing a single time is 1 in 256, which is already very unlikely. Missing 20 times has a 0. This percentage of happening. Lost City. Within the data of Pokémon Red and Blue, there's an empty slot for a location in Kanto, which is North Indigo Plateau. Flying to this location will freeze your game, and there's not too much to it. There's an early concept of Kanto's map in which we can see a city west of Vermilion. What's interesting is that this very location is on the way to the SSN expected route. It actually reminds me of the Neon City urban legend. Is it possible that the origin of this legend has to do with this location here? Gorochu. In Cinnabar Lab, there's a room with an NPC that will offer an electrode in exchange for a Raichu. What's interesting about this trade is that once you do it, the man will say that the Raichu you traded went and evolved. This of course would make a lot of people believe that there was a secret evolution of Raichu that could be obtained. It's noteworthy that Game Freak actually planned to design an evolution of Raichu named Gorochu, as revealed in a 2018 interview in which Sugimori said that this Pokemon would have fangs and a set of horns, but due to balance issues, it was left out. Buy it or die. Anti-piracy messages have become very popular. Supposedly, there was a message spoken by a sailor in Vermilion City in Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green that, if the game detected that the copy was illegal, the sailor would tell the player that if he liked the game, he should buy it or die. The fact that somebody at Game Freak would put such an offensive message for the player is almost unthinkable. As it turns out, this was a hoax, as nowhere in the code of the game is there a message like that. 39 cut Pokemon. Shigeki Morimoto, a programmer, said that the first generation of Pokemon would have had 190 Pokemon, but they were cut due to memory constraints. Some of them were redesigned and saved for later generations. Here are some of them. Pokémon 731. This is the weirdest one by far. To summarize, somebody at Game Freak wanted to establish a second great empire by brainwashing children using the Lavender Town's music. There's a video in which a player supposedly encounters Pokémon 731, which shows a sprite with images related to Unit 731, a Japanese biological and chemical warfare research unit. Ken Sugimori's art, wrong colors. Ken Sugimori's watercolor art from the first generations is very popular and loved by many, but there's something odd about the coloring. The Bulbasaur line is green in the games, but it clearly looks blue in Ken Sugimori's art. And not only that, but other Pokemon, if not all of them, have a different color. This is not because they were early designs, but because the scans distorted the original color Sugimori painted. A user by the name of Liu2 is working on restoring the images to look the way they intended to be. Every copy of Red and Blue is personalized. Believe it or not, Game Freak intended for the original games to have 65,535 different versions, making them almost personalized. The odds of coming across somebody with exactly the same version as yours would be as remote as encountering Mirage Island in Pokémon Emerald. According to Takenori Ota, one of the original developers of the game, depending on an ID that would be generated the moment you boot up the game, not only would you be able to encounter very specific species of Pokemon not found in other games, but also see a completely different version of Kanto from other versions. Satoshi Tajiri really wanted to make every game different for everyone, but once he consulted Shigeru Miyamoto, it was decided that there would be only a handful of versions. I'm not sure how feasible this would have been considering the limitations of the Game Boy, but it's a very interesting mechanic. Amber in Pokémon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. In order to understand this, you would need to know who Amber is. For those who don't, Amber was the daughter of Dr. Fuji, a scientist who appears in the first movie and also in The Birth of Mewtwo, who was the main responsible for cloning Mew in order to create the most powerful Pokemon in existence. Unfortunately, Amber died in an accident, so Fuji worked really hard to create a clone of her, Amber 2, as well as clones for Bulbasaur, Charmander, Squirtle and Mewtwo. If we enter the Pokemon Mansion in Cinnabar Island, there's an area where we'll see a set of 4 capsules used for cloning, plus another one where Mewtwo was being developed. It is said that the 4 capsules could have belonged to Amber, the 3 starter Pokemon and Mewtwo. Maybe it's a coincidence, but it might be a reference to these events. Okay guys, so thank you so much for your support and for watching the video. We're very close to reaching 1000 subscribers, please help me reach this milestone and have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.